Welcome to the Secure CIO, the podcast for technology executives who are tasked with hiring and retaining great cybersecurity leaders. Join best-selling author Claire Pales together with industry thought leaders as they answer your questions about sourcing the right leaders, building cybersecurity teams, candidate selection, salaries, skills, and more.
Hello, I'm Claire Pales and welcome to the Secure CIO podcast. Today's guest is Pip Jenkinson, and before I dive in, I'd like to hand over to Pip to give us an acknowledgement of country.
Thanks, Claire. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I'd also like to pay my respects to their customs and their people and acknowledge leaders past, present and emerging. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Pip. Pip is an ex-serving member of the Australian Defence Force and has been involved in the ICT community in Australia for about 12 years. Pip now works for one of Australia's leading Indigenous ICT security providers, Baidam Solutions. Baidam Solutions is focused on helping customers achieve logical business outcomes, increased security maturity using innovative local and international security controls. Their commitment to giving back to their local community helps us all bridge the gap of Indigenous representation in the IT security sector, and Baidam Solutions has included in its corporate charter a structured and measurable plan called the Baidam Initiative to provide both specialist ICT security certification funding and meaningful employment opportunities for the First Nations communities. Pip sits on a number of not-for-profit advisory boards and regularly supports the charity Soldier On. Soldier On helps contemporary veterans and their families build successful futures. A husband, father, brother, son, and proud supporter of the cause, Pip is passionate about creating real change. Pip, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, look, absolute pleasure to be here, Claire. Thank you very much.
I also want to thank you particularly for joining me today as we're recording this on National Sorry Day, the 26th of May. I really appreciate your time and welcome an opportunity for you to share your thoughts around Sorry Day.
Oh, look, once again, thank you. Sorry Day is an Australia-wide observance held on May 26th each year. It gives an opportunity for all people, Indigenous and non, from all walks of life, just pause and reflect on the healing process that has to occur for us to recognise the stolen generation. It allows us to look back on our history together, truthfully, and then with that observation, take positive steps to have a bright future for everybody in Australia.
On this very important day for all Australians, let's dive into the podcast. But before we get to the questions, we've heard a bit about you in your bio, but what are some of the pivotal moments for you in your career that have led to this point today?
I had an interesting career that has brought us to this point today. As you've mentioned, being an ex-serving member of the Australian Defence Force, you're going to uni, graduating from uni, and then sort of bouncing around in different careers from time to time, not really finding my feet, working in jobs as most young men do, pulling beers or working as a labourer on many building sites, pretty much living from paycheck to paycheck. But I mean, one of the things that I like to remember in my career that there was this, and the pivotal moment that allowed me to participate in the IT security industry was I applied for a job with a software vendor, a security software vendor, and I was interviewed by who is regarded now as one of the grandfathers of the Australian IT security industry. And I was fortunate enough to get a start. Someone took a punt on me, and after the interview and after being onboarded into the organisation, this venerable old guy took me aside and said, "Mate, I can teach aptitude, I can't teach attitude." And so where I was given an opportunity to thrive and being in an industry that provides all the benefits of working in IT security, I have to acknowledge that the guy that gave me a start really took a chance and sort of honed on this idea that attitude was what he was looking for. And that's how I've ended up where I am today.
We've actually talked about that in previous episodes of the podcast. A lot of our guests talk about how leadership and career really comes down to attitude and that, pretty much everything else you can be taught. So obviously that's brought you to where you are today. You're part of Baidam Solutions. What was the driving force behind that organisation being created?
Yeah, great story. Let me just tell you a little bit about why Baidam and why Baidam is so important. It's about 60,000 years ago, if we cast our mind back. Before we had Google Calendars, the traditional people of Torres Strait had identified a number of constellations, the seafaring people, and they'd use these constellations as navigational points and indeed points of security. There was one particular constellation that was very important to the Torres Strait Islanders, and that was the Baidam, or the Baidam, as it's pronounced, although it's spelled Baidam, so we just use that pronunciation. And it was the Baidam constellation, and the Baidam looks a little bit like a shark. The shark is one of their totem animals, and if the Baidam constellation was high in the sky, it was a time to go and plant certain crops and harvest certain vegetables for the security of the village. It was all about this providing for the village. When the Baidam constellation was low in the sky and it was on the horizon, it was a very clear security point of reference to say, stay out of the water because it's shark breeding time. And but it was also time to go and collect turtle eggs. So right from the reasons why Baidam was created, we wanted to make it culturally significant and use some of those traditional stories and learnings in the way that we position ourselves in the market. So Baidam Solutions was created to provide a point of security for First Nations people who are looking to get more involved in our ICT community or our village. And we want to be leading by example to provide all the necessary steps for Indigenous men and women to get a start in the industry, just like I got a start because someone gave me a go. I guess one of the cataclysmic events that we all invariably will share is the passing of one of our parents. When my dad passed away 2 years ago, it caused me to stop and pause and do a little bit of introspection to my own career and the sort of the value systems that I wanted to impart on my family and my son. And it was that moment 2 years ago that lit a fire to say, mate, you can do better. That's how Baidam got started.
So you've had a pretty interesting 24 months. Tell us about the growth of the business and your community involvement.
Oh, well, mate, it's been absolutely fascinating for me as a non-Indigenous man to participate in what we're doing. On reflection, the last 24 months have been like any small business. Ups and downs and wins and losses, but it all just seems to be magnified when we're combining the wins and losses of a commercial engine together with a social outcome, which is what we're trying to do. I'm very pleased to say that we have doubled our growth, doubled our revenue, and our community involvement to date doesn't just exist around this funding model that we'll talk about later, but it's also to reinvest in programs that already bring Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities together. Sport, for instance, is one of the key passions of everybody in the Baidam family. Last year, we sponsored the Indigenous grassroots Byron Bay Rugby Sevens because sport is a great leveller and it allows everybody to compete fairly, and that's one of the processes that we're trying to implement into the ICT community landscape.
So I want to talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion, and I think organisations talk a lot about that and wanting to meet certain quotas or be seen as a good corporate citizen. And from your perspective, particularly given your organisation support of Indigenous people and Indigenous communities, what are some of the barriers that you're seeing to more diverse and inclusive organisations? Okay,
so this is a topic that we could spend about 3 or 4 consecutive podcasts on, but I wouldn't want to bore your audience with listening to me drone on. But like anything, there is, as clear as the question, some organisations pay lip service to diversity and inclusion, and certainly not just from an Indigenous perspective, but from a gender perspective and from a neurospectrum perspective, for a veteran's perspective. But what I'm finding is that sometimes when I'm coming to present our organisation's capability to an ASX top 200, they've got no idea that I'm a non-Indigenous man. So I lead in with this description about the who and the why and the what that we do, and I provide references of federal government agencies in highly risk-adverse areas and a list of every 20 Gartner far-right leading quadrant security vendor that has given us their commercial support But still, at that time, the customer has the choice. Now, the choice is the acronym that we use in Baidam to articulate our value proposition: courage, honesty, originality, innovation, to challenge the status quo and to educate or to be educated. What we explained to each other at the beginning of the podcast was a way of me educating another non-Indigenous person on the other end of this conversation, you, to a culturally significant story. So sometimes, unfortunately, and I think it's just part of human nature, that we fear the things that we don't understand. Or some organisations absolutely use or hide behind things like reconciliation action plans. I have a framework to encourage Indigenous diversity, but it's simply a tick box. In our industry, in the security industry, it's the difference between compliance and security. Both are desperately important, but both serve very different roles in an organisation. Just like an organisation will use a reconciliation action plan as a compliance mean to tick the box to say, I've got a plan, we're all okay here, nothing to see here. On the other end of the scale are those organisations that are absolutely supporting us with incredible passion. It's fantastic. Some of those organisations don't have a reconciliation action plan, and we'll touch on reconciliation action plans later and the importance of what they represent when they're followed in the true spirit of the contract. But I think some of the challenges that face, certainly from an Indigenous business perspective, is this ingrained sense of ignorance. I certainly have challenged some of my own ignorances when I started on this journey. So, look, we're up against some very real, large, and at times ugly barriers of inclusion. But we're doing our very best, and by participating in today's podcast, I hope that if this elicits some sort of cognitive thought process where someone can get in contact and just ask more questions, that's what we're all about.
I think the opportunity for us to do better is absolutely there, and your vision for Baidam is to become Australia's leading Indigenous IT security solution provider by 2025. What do you think the future holds for First Nations in ICT?
As a personal observation, I think it's very bright. I think it's a very bright future for First Nations people. But what I would do is I would preface that optimism by saying I think everybody listening in on this podcast and the people that you've had before, and hopefully the people after, will also acknowledge to say that there are some significant barriers that are technical barriers for things like the freedom of access to high-performance internet. These are the things that I can't control. Baidam can't control NBN to Tennant Creek. That's not our bag. So when I am making these observations about what I think the future looks like, it really is just from our perspective looking out. And what I can see, and perhaps what some of the listeners might agree with, is that nothing has been proven so clearly that our ability to interact from a working from home environment with COVID-19 allows us to start extrapolating that observation out to say, well, hang on a minute. ICT, and indeed ICT security, can and often is run from and has been run from a non-face-to-face environment. We now, as we know, are staring down a skills deficit within the ICT community. And we are all in the ICT security space. We are all competing for talent, whether you're Indigenous or non, whether you're a boy or a girl. Every sector is competing for that STEM talent. Now, what I'm proposing and the way that we're structuring our offerings to our customers is to have this little thought bubble that says, hang on a minute, the ICT security industry is one of the few industries that we can actually have Indigenous First Nations people participate in the economy that's created by security and not leave their traditional land to move into a big city to be part of that harsh, abrasive ecosystem. We can have NV1, NV2 cleared guys doing external pen testing. And when I say guys, I mean the collective noun. We can do all this. We're not bound by asking First Nations people to leave their traditional lands and their customs and their families to sit in an office and punch out code. Now, I think that concept is fascinating, and I'd like to explore it more. and certainly in the offerings that we're presenting to our federal government customers and our state outside of Queensland, our state government customers, is exactly that. Allow us to participate in the economy that is, by its very nature, is digital. So yeah, it's a bright future. We just need, we need to not take our eye off the bouncing ball. We need to absolutely focus on understanding and being cognizant and aware of some of those barriers. And it's not about a hand out; it's just about a hand up.
Absolutely, and this opportunity for Indigenous Australians to be part of the future of our industry through the opportunities that you guys are presenting is such a great offering that you can give. And as you said earlier, you're not asking for your clients to give you any more money. You're making the commitment to take some of that money and invest it in people who wouldn't necessarily always be given those opportunities. But speaking of which, tell me a little bit about the work you're doing in cyber or information security with grads and how you're planning to grow that program to support these types of professionals.
Yeah, okay. So look, and this is part of my own ignorances that, one of the reasons why Baidam was created in its infancy was that I was unable to rattle off Indigenous participants in the IT security space as quickly as I could Indigenous sports stars or Indigenous politicians or Indigenous activists or musicians. And when it came to an area that I thought that I knew a little bit about, I was absolutely ashamed that I couldn't rattle off Indigenous pen testers or SecOps managers or sysadmin or level 1, level 2 or a CISO or a CIO. Now, thankfully that ignorance has been lifted and now I can rattle off boys and girls that fit that criteria. There just needs to be more of them. So the what around the question or indeed the how around the what is how are we doing this with graduates? And in our first 12 months, we made a commitment to provide a funding mechanism that would support 6 Indigenous grads. Now, the reason why the grad bit is important, because as you know, you don't need a university degree to participate in our sector. Indeed, you don't even need to finish school. A lot of the most competent white hat hackers that I know sometimes haven't finished year 12. But the Baidam Initiative is about providing a one-way funding model, so it's not being repaid. And so when we're giving out these grants, and the last time I checked, which was only yesterday, a SANS Incident Response Handlers course is 10 grand. So when we're handing out these 10 grand scholarships, it's with no expectation of being repaid. And so the one thing as a small business that gives us confidence that the recipient of that funding will succeed is that when you finish university as an Indigenous student, it's not telling me that you're a master of that particular subject. It tells me that you've built up resilience, and it tells me you've overcome huge barriers that a privileged white guy can only begin to understand. And so by handing a funding mechanism to augment your university qualifications with an international certification, the risk on Baidam is somewhat diminished. Furthermore, we then are able to take that individual once certified to an international standard. So now think anything from the SANS categories and anything from ISC squared. And if we were to make a generalisation, we could say, generally that those two organisations will sit nicely between, a management style of security certification versus a technical style of certification. So once again, it's up to the individual. We're not trying to pigeonhole students into going down one path. But in the full Baidam ecosystem, we then, once certified, we then take that individual by the hand and present them back to the very organisation that has allowed us to generate that funding and have a very nice conversation that is no longer it's no longer about an HR interview process. It's about, dear Mr. Customer, here is a tangible result of you doing business with Baidam Solutions. Not only have you got lights on, business as usual, you've got the world's best vulnerability scanner, you've got this, you've got these flashing lights, but you've also got Mary. And Mary is a university qualified lady. She's got a degree in computer science. But through your investment in us, we've been able to make Mary a SANS Instant level 1, level 2 handler. Now, would you be able to have a chat with Mary about what she would like to do in the industry? Now, when we put all of those things together, we're starting to achieve what I believe is the village approach to diversity and inclusion, because after 12 years, and you may be in the same position, Claire, after 12 years of doing this, we have a number of connections that are personal. So if I know the Chief Information Security Officer, and I don't, but if I know the Chief Information Security Officer of Westpac Bank, and we are able to present this candidate to him directly to say, here is what we've all done. Baidam hasn't done it on its own. Mary hasn't done it on her own. And Mr. Customer, you haven't done it on your own. But together, we've presented this, and it hasn't cost you any more. Now, in the 12 months that Baidam has been up and running, so we're 24 months now, but in our first 12 months, we've been able to do that 6 times. Now, all 6 of them have been university qualified. 4 of them have been women. And I'm really proud about that. The whole Baidam family, that's the bit that gets us up and running in the morning. And I can share this with you, although I can't share specifically which university it is, but there is a university in Queensland that is about to receive a scholarship for the life of the uni. And it's going to be called the Baidam Scholarship. And so from this year in NAIDOC week to the end of time, a university Indigenous student studying STEM will be given a Baidam Scholarship. So in 20 years' time, when Baidam the business is no longer around, and you and I are both grey and in retirement homes, there will still be every year a Baidam Scholarship handed out. Now that, to me, is what the whole industry could do. Now, it beggars belief that this hasn't been attempted before. However, I'm more than happy to take that challenge head on, and by ploughing new ground and demonstrating that capability and capacity is not always with the bigger organisations. If we can start demonstrating this, then I hope that in a couple of years' time, other Indigenous organisations look at us, and just like someone once pushed up a picture of JT, Jonathan Thurston, and aspired to be like Jonathan Thurston, we want to be role models for other businesses to follow what we do. And everything that we do has to be, to the best of our ability, absolutely perfect, from our domestic violence policy to our drugs at work policy to the very members that make up our board. It has to be done in such a way that other people can look at that and go, I want to be like that one day. What do those guys do? And I'm saying, guys, come talk to me. The industry is big enough for all of us to participate in.
Well, I think that your wish of being a role model in the future has definitely already been granted. I mean, you guys are, the fact that you're getting female Indigenous cybersecurity graduates, upskilling them, putting them out into organisations, I'm happy for us to be told we're wrong in that there's anyone else doing that in Australia. And, you know, I think the opportunity was there. And as you said, you're surprised no one's done it before, but I think you guys have got the drive and the passion and the willingness to put your money behind these initiatives and lift these people up, because that lifts you guys up as well. And I think it's an incredible opportunity for the graduates as well, and you know the life of the career that they will have and the life that they will have because of you guys is something to be commended. Absolutely. Let's change direction a little bit. I want to talk about your work on boards. What are you seeing from an ICT and cyber perspective? Because I've spoken to other podcast guests about the low levels of STEM backgrounds in board directors. In the not-for-profit space, what are you seeing?
Look, I think the challenges that are facing boards, whether it's at the whether it's the ASX list, the ASX top end of town, or whether it's a not-for-profit, or whether it's it's a school board, the idea that STEM directors make up less than 3% of current participation is indicative of this idea that we need to do more to innovate and be an innovator rather than an adopter. I see it firsthand, because a lot of the threats and the risks that are coming in that need guidance from the board are around things that perhaps are not their area of expertise. They may be excellent lawyers, and they may be, wonderful teachers, or they may be unreal professors. But when it comes to this concept of understanding, categorising and managing risk from a technical perspective, but that seems to be the playground of men and women that come from a professionally trained area like STEM. The concept that a mathematical guy can deal in absolutes, and the concept that an engineering professor can deal with risk in a confined space, and then articulate that and almost take the emotion out of dealing with a risk and from a board perspective. What I am very confident in seeing in the not-for-profit space is this idea or this concept of mentoringship, where CIOs that are looking to come up onto a board environment are being not only actively encouraged, but are also being mentored to come up and embracing that diversity of skill set, because the very challenges that we're facing from an Indigenous inclusion and diversity perspective are indeed the same challenges that are facing the boards of today, and I just think it's going to take a combined effort of everybody.
Pip, you mentioned at the very start I mentioned at the very start of the podcast in your bio that you are passionate about real change, and I wanted to wrap up the podcast today by asking you to tell us, what does real change look like to you?
Oh, mate, real change looks like when we don't even have to think about what we're talking about today. It's not an issue. We don't have to make a conscious effort to change the behaviour of organisations to support Indigenous First Nations people. It just happens. And on the other side of that are the First Nations people themselves that feel like they're safe, and they feel like that when they join an organisation, they're going to be accepted. And once again, not scored or a set of criteria around their culture or the colour of their skin, but how they perform. And that's going to be the same across the board for men and women, black or white, gay or straight. It's about capability. And I think if we can bring all that together as a sector, that's what real change is going to look like for me.
Well, I think you're absolutely a role model, and so is your organisation. And I really want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with me and my listeners today. And I really wish you all the best. And thank you for the work that you're doing for cybersecurity in our industry, and also for obviously the Indigenous people who are the recipients of your program. So you're doing some great things, and you should be very proud. So thanks, Pip, for your time.
Thank you very much.
That's all we have time for today. Thanks so much for listening. For more information on all our guests, check out the show notes at thesecurecio.com, where you can also find more information on the Secure CIO framework and sign up for my newsletter. If you loved the show, please subscribe to the podcast and feel free to leave me a 5-star rating. I'll see you next week.